Remember, you can get in touch with our fearsome foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, I'm Rob Rose, and welcome to another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. This week, I'll be joined by JB, PB, and Aldrin as we look at the franchises still looking to find those key pieces to add to their roster to make a real run for the Lombardi Trophy in 2021. We'll be looking at the free agents that could be key and which puzzle pieces could help these teams jigsaw to a successful season in the year ahead. So, with so much to talk about, let's get on with the show.
Jesus, I almost fell down. I got too hyped, man. I almost went down.
Where?
Right out right there.
You almost fell?
Yeah.
Was it noticeable?
Yes.
So, hi, gents.
Hi, Rob.
It's very, very swift, PB. I like that. So, some more free agency chat, although as the weeks count down, there's probably a point where we're going to shift this over to the draft. But the pieces that our key teams need to be competitive in 2021 will be the topic for this show. After, of course, we kick things off as we always do with Phil's Quiz of the Week. So, PB, what have you got for us?
Welcome to Phil's Quiz of the Week.
Thanks, Rob. Good one this week. Multi-choice. So, who holds the best rookie passer rating in NFL history? Is it A, Dan Marino, B, Dak Prescott, C, Robert Griffin III, or D, Tom Brady?
B.
Yeah, I'd say Dak.
Oh, so Dak came in for Romo during the season, didn't he?
No, Romo got injured in the first or second preseason game and started from there. The thing I was waiting for Justin Herbert to be one of the multiple choice okay.
Brady came in later though, didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, see, Robert Griffin III has got RG3 was rookie of the year, wasn't he? Had an amazing season.
You think of him more moving with his legs, don't you? Like a prototype for like Lamar.
I think it was Dak.
So you're going Dak. JB, you're going Dak.
I've gone Dak, yeah.
Dan Marino made a Super Bowl in his second. I'm going to go Dan Marino.
Two of you are right. Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott finished his rookie season with a passer rating of 104.9, breaking the previous record of 102.4 set by
Dan Marino.
Robert Griffin III. So you went Rob.
So no, Dan Marino. Not been an Ace Ventura though, has he, Dak? I mean,
that kind of says a lot to, I think, how you forget how good RG3's first season was.
Yeah, I mean, he was a phenomenon, wasn't he? That first year was ridiculous.
He just ended up being hammered into the ground so many times, though, didn't he? I mean, you talk about the Lamar kind of prototype, but he was just hit so often, and those knees were never going to be able to keep up.
Well, you think as well, so that draft class was Andrew Luck was taken first that year, wasn't he?
Yeah, RG3 second. And actually, famously, that was the reason they took Luck, wasn't it? The Colts were concerned that RG3 just wasn't durable enough, and I mean, I guess neither of them were in the end, but
how that turned out.
Yeah, Andrew Luck was probably the better pick.
Well, yeah, the Colts saw what the Washington team did and thought, we'll do the same. We'll just do it longer.
Yeah, an experiment that neither would want to repeat.
Thanks for listening. That was Phil's Quiz of the Week.
But nice that you brought us all the way around to draft chat. So stay tuned, everybody, for upcoming weeks where we'll look at draft prospects for all of your favourite NFL teams. But with our quiz, I don't want to say out the way, Phil. You know, it flashed, it was brief but wonderful. So now we're left with our topic of what puzzle pieces need to be filled for your teams to be relevant Super Bowl contenders in 2021. And we're going to start, JB, with your little review of all things the Steelers of Pittsburgh.
So this was kind of my suggested topic of the week. And then when I sat down to look at where the piece was, like, well, could be cornerback now with kind of Steven Nelson being released. It could be running back because James Conner's not been re-signed. We haven't really made any moves for anybody else. And overall, though, I think I'm going to have to kind of try and combine a lot of points and say I think it's the offensive line. The Steelers starting 5 for the week 1 game against the Giants was Zach Banner, Maurkice Pouncey, Stefan Wisniewski, Alejandro Villanueva, and Matt Feiler. Only 2 of those 5 are currently under contract. And of those 2, only one of them actually managed to make it to the end of the game. David DeCastro has been an absolute rock for the line for years now. Zach Banner's coming back off what I think was a torn ACL in that very, very first game. And I would expect him to slot back in at right tackle where they were going to have him before. Kevin Dodson.
Dodson, we've got Dodson here.
The rookie that the Steelers picked up in the draft last year has been phenomenal. I think made a lot of all-rookie teams after the season was over, but center with Pouncey retiring and left tackle with Villanueva not back currently are kind of the 2 biggest problems and potentially kind of the 2 biggest roles that you need to fill on the line. You need to have someone in there protecting the quarterback's blind side, and you need someone to snap him the ball. Now, the Steelers have brought back BJ Finney, I think, from the Bengals, or it was he either went Seahawks, Bengals, or he went Bengals, Seahawks, but they've brought him back, and I think are slotting him potentially as starting center, which is fine. He's served that role before when Pouncey's been out injured, but the left tackle situation needs to be solved because you haven't got very long to bed a guy in. You know, Ben Roethlisberger, for as long as his career has gone in comparison to some of the others drafted around him, he's not going to go on forever. And as he increasingly becomes more and more broken, kind of like RG3 and Andrew Luck, as we've talked about, the need to get someone who can perform immediately and hold that line so the Steelers can get a run game going and start to actually compete throughout the season is imperative.
So my question to you would be, I mean, of all the places you want to fill, the line isn't an ideal setting, is it? I mean, those guys have already pretty much been grabbed from the free agency market, although I am about to propose an over-under on Fisher and Schwartz being Steelers next season. Wait for that. But does this not feel, JB? I mean, I appreciate you saying, you know, with a couple of pieces on the offensive line, the Steelers could be relevant. I think you're right. I think James Conner, if you're replacing him at running back, I feel like you could pick somebody up, you know, who can run well enough and catch well enough to fill that void. But does this not just feel like the last year before a really big reboot? Does it not just feel like Ben's come back without much fanfare, actually without the franchise saying much positive about him at all? Does it not just feel like they're going to ride out this season and then maybe look at 2022 as the time they put all the pieces back together? The only reason I said that is, you know, we've obviously got the draft we're going to talk about in the coming weeks, but to try and get starting linemen in the draft, you know, rookie season starting linemen, I think also feels like a bit of a big stretch. Do you really think the Steelers will find a way to sort it?
Do I hope they will? Yes, absolutely, of course. Do I think they will? It's 50-50. We've talked off air and on recently about how successful teams actually are in the draft and what the actual percentage of finding even 2 or 3 players in a single draft class that you keep and become cornerstone players in your franchise and how slim those kind of hopes are. Yes, I think this is very much like we're going to let Ben have potentially one last go. This could be Roethlisberger's last season. And then, once the salary cap goes back up next season and some of that television deal cash money starts coming in, then maybe the Steelers will look to splash the cash a little bit, try and bring in some other players. I think one of the interesting things from a Steelers fan point of view is the Steelers' record with free agency in sort of the last 5-6 years. It's not good. I can't really think of many free agents the Steelers have A, bought in anyway, and B, that have been incredible, like game-changing piece. mentioned Steven Nelson being released and the problems that causes with cornerback. I think he's potentially one of only a few that actually came in and contributed. Joe Hayden kind of on the other side being absolutely the same. Thankfully, we've still kept him. This does feel a lot like a franchise that are going to have problems if they don't start building for the future, because there's not many pieces left, I think, that are going to go for that long, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Left tackle's really tough as a market, I think, at the minute. That obviously Villanueva's left, hasn't he? And in truth, obviously, I'm going to touch on the Colts, but we've just signed a left tackle from the Chargers almost as an insurance gap if we can't find somebody in the draft. And I think, I don't know if there's many better left tackles than Villanueva knocking about. Like Rob said, it's not really a position you want to have to be searching for. And, going into the season with so many question marks about the line is always tough. We touched on it last week about that chemistry and that being so important to building an offense, and the guys in the line being crucial to that. So, so much disruption is never good, is it really?
I think you're spot on with what you think they need. The line is the biggest part or their biggest hole at the moment. I think, with the Pouncey brothers retiring, that's left a massive void for them to try and fill. I think can you see that? I think there's a high or a big tackle pool in the draft. A big pool of tackles. Yeah, you think they'd need to tackle to draft someone, for the offensive line, for the tackle position, but then you kind of feel that they are all in this year for Big Ben's last year. It's either, like Rob said, it's either now or they're going to have to, blow it up for a bit of a rebuild. They've got a young...
I don't know, though. Do you really feel like they're all in for Ben's last year? It feels like they've kind of let pieces go that have been the mainstay of, Villanueva's been around and the Steelers are nothing if not loyal. Huh?
Keeping Roethlisberger around.
Right, because they can't get a shot of his cap number. If he wasn't on the roster, they're on a big hit, so they needed to restructure his contract and keep him around, I think. But I don't know. Like you say, there's a decent crop of tackles that are kind of knocking about, but they're all risks. We talked about Fisher. He could come in potentially, but he's just coming off the back of an injury, and I don't know. The tackles that are left for a reason. The good ones have been picked, really, is what I feel. So
it's funny though. You never know how people are going to adapt to changes, do you? If I take the Buccaneers as an example, because obviously they're what I know most about. Donovan Smith at left tackle, was probably our most maligned player, and had been poor, and we were thinking, well, this will be his last year, and we can get shot of him at the end of the season for no cap hit. And actually, he's just signed another a 2-year extension with something like 30 million guaranteed money because he played so well last year. Having Brady come in and that settled line, he looked absolutely stellar. So who's to say that there isn't, the backup tackle at the Steelers or somebody else that they pick up through free agency that actually hasn't really, knocked it out of the park at wherever he's been. But if he just lands in the right spot at the Steelers, that it works out really well. And then again, if you look at the draft, last year there was a good crop of tackles in the draft, and we picked up Tristan Wirfs, and he was probably, I would say, he was arguably the best one out of the lot. But the guy that the Jets picked up and a couple of the others as well, it was a strong pool, and I think that's a position that is going to be quite strong in this draft as well.
I agree with you there, and it's not to say that I think the Steelers line on the whole was particularly bad. I think it wasn't as good as it has been historically, but it wasn't terrible in comparison to others. And because of kind of the rotation of injuries that happened, I said, I already mentioned Kevin Dodson.
Dodson, we've got Dodson here.
Was a great find in the draft who really settled in to a starting position when he needed to. Chuck's Okorafor, and I'm really sorry to everybody if I've pronounced that wrong. It's a little beyond me, but he kind of stepped in at right tackle once Banner was injured. So there could be the argument said, okay, well, if you want Banner to slide across to the left, let's say, we'll leave Chucks on the right, or put Chucks at left and leave Banner on the right. There are things that can be done. I think it's also important that the Steelers have made a change at offensive coordinator, which is obviously also going to impact how the line plays. I don't think how the run game that the Steelers were running last year fit the pieces that they had. So hopefully this year, maybe with a bit more of those like run sweep things that we saw early on in the season, might kind of give everyone a bit more space to get out in front of everything.
See, I just think if you needed one, I could see a route to that, like you say, through the draft, or, you know, I just think there's too many. And when you start talking about, well, we'll move that guy and this guy can come in on rotation, and, you know, this guy's already filled in capably and so on. I just think, I don't know, I think in 12 months, you'll have an organization looking for scapegoats. You'll have the back of, you know, Big Ben, and you'll be waving him goodbye. Oh, I don't know. I think it's going to take an awful lot of pulling rabbits out of hats for the Steelers to address that. And I think, bizarrely, the only other thing that makes me think it's got reboot written all over it is you've kind of got a few other teams on the up in that division. You know, for the last 20 years, who'd have cared if you had problems in the offensive line when twice a season you're playing the Browns and so on and so forth? I don't know. I mean, maybe a reboot is due and it's not the end of the world. But I do want to propose a quick little wager. So under over, Fisher or Schwartz, a Steeler week 1, 2021. What do you reckon, PB?
I can believe that.
They'll both still be injured, won't they?
Fisher's more likely to come back. I think Schwartz is more of a question mark as to whether he might just retire with that kind of back neck injury. But Fisher feels like he could be back.
There you go. Heard it here first. JB, would you be happy with Fisher at, well, I'm guessing we're kind of putting both
left
of them
tackle
in the mix for left tackle, aren't we? Yeah, we're not seeing anyone else move across. How would you feel?
I would be incredibly happy to take left offensive tackle Eric Fisher at the Steelers. I think he was a big part of that line that helped Mahomes when they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I do think him being a loss for the Super Bowl after playing so well in the championship game contributed to the Chiefs' poor play in the Super Bowl that kind of let the Tampa Bay Buccaneers win, which I don't think we mention a lot on this podcast.
Not really.
But yeah, I'd absolutely take him.
Well, there you go. We've already done our crystal ball show, haven't we? But maybe that's a late edition. So the Pittsburgh Steelers only need 3 linemen, a running back, and probably some cover at cornerback to be relevant next season. It all feels like it's falling into place. So next we're going to go to Phil, where Phil pretends the Tampa Bay Buccaneers need to fill spaces on their roster. I mean, all the Tampa Bay Buccaneers need to do is freeze time right now, don't they? But I'm curious to know what roster holes need to be filled on the all guns blazing superstar roster that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I think you're pretty much right. You know, when we said we were looking at our own teams, it's just a struggle really to think where we need to kind of fill a hole. And even stop it. If you look at the draft this year, I think it's certainly the first time in my memory and the first time in a long time that I can think of, you know, not just my team, but any team really drafting for depth and for the future rather than drafting for a need. You know, I can't think of a player that we need to draft that needs to step in on day one. So, you know, if I look at the biggest need as it stands today, you know, it would have been defensive tackle or defensive end, you know, D-line, but we re-signed Ndamukong Suh, so that's kind of ticked that box. The only 2 kind of high-profile free agents that we haven't signed yet are Antonio Brown and Leonard Fournette. And you think, well, we've got our top 2 receivers in Evans and Godwin, and we've got a young receiving core with Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson. So Antonio Brown would be a nice to have, and I'd love him to come back. But if we don't get him, that, you know, it's not the end of the world. And then Leonard Fournette as well. And I think that's probably our biggest hole at the moment. I think there was a lot of talk about James White signing for the Bucs in free agency, and he's obviously gone back to the Patriots. So it's a pass catching back that we need, really. I think Ronald Jones will be the lead back, as he was for most of the regular season last year until he got hurt. But it was the 1-2 punch with him and Fournette that worked really well in the playoffs. So I do think we do need another running back. They're talking about Fournette working on it with the Bucs, and I'm surprised he's not signed anywhere else, really, depending on what money he wants. But I'd say that's our biggest need at the moment, is finding someone, a running back 2 almost, or a running back 1B to play alongside Ronald Jones. But after that, it's hard pushed to know what we really need aside from a quarterback who's, going to be able to take over from Brady.
I kind of get your point. The weakness for me always felt like last year was at cornerback. And I don't know what you think, but I still think, the guy that got absolutely torched by Tyreek Hill last year in that first game, I don't think that he remarkably improved. I just think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers got way better at getting pressure up front. And that was the big reason that Mahomes wasn't able to find his receivers in that Super Bowl final. So for me, I feel like cornerback is more a position of need, purely because Ronald Jones for you can be he can be the guy on all 3 downs potentially. But equally, I think you can find a running back off the street, or in the draft really late in the day. And, if you want to find a running back that can catch and not have to do the shed load of the work, then there's an awful lot of them knocking about in free agency and in the draft. So corner for me is more a challenge. And I think there's some good ones in this draft. I know you're not picking high, but there look like some good ones. I mean, I don't know if you saw JC Horn's workout the other day, but he looked phenomenal. And there's going to be, a good crop of corners like Surtain and what have you. So there's a few, but that would be my pick for you rather than running back. I never think running back's a position of need because you can find somebody anywhere.
I think our secondary definitely improved in the playoffs. That was probably our weakness in the regular season, but then the Gravediggers really came alive in the playoffs. And it was Carlton Davis who got torched by Tyreek Hill in week 12, but then we were missing, I think Jamel Dean missed that game. And then if you look at the Super Bowl, I think we had more coverage with the safeties helping out the corners there than we did in that week 12 game. So I think we just game planned a bit better. But you're right. I don't think, if I look at our cornerbacks, I think as a unit, they certainly work well together in the playoffs, and they're a good kind of bright young crop, but there isn't that star, the Seahawks had Sherman, and, the Cardinals obviously had P2 until recently. And, I don't think there's that real star cornerback that we've got.
See, the funny thing about off-season narratives is I think obviously 12 months ago you were helped massively by the fact Jameis Winston left and Brady came in. I actually think your biggest off-season boost this season is Jameis Winston again. I mean, the teams around you in your division are either starting again or have got worse, and for me, when you've got Brady, Gronkowski, you've already mentioned Sue, you're talking about even before this Super Bowl run with the Bucs last season, you're talking about people who know how to play in those high-pressure playoff games. They absolutely understand what it takes to be successful in playoff football. And I just think your route to the playoffs is easier this time than last time. I think you absolutely go into this season as favourites for the division, whereas last season? Well, last season you didn't win the division, did you? You came in as 6th seed, was it, in the Saints? So I just think Jameis Winston lining up most likely in the centre for the Saints is probably the best bit of off-season news the Bucs could have had.
I'd agree. It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I still, almost want to see Winston do well, because I think he's got such potential. The offensive numbers that he put up were amazing. It was just the picks on the other side. And obviously he's had his laser eye surgery, so we'll see if that makes a difference to that. But I don't know. I kind of have a soft spot for him. But then at the same time, the whole eating the W stuff after they beat us in the regular season last year, I'm like, yeah, you can get stuff, mate. I would love to see him throw a couple of picks to our cornerbacks next season.
So much for wishing him well. That sentence started with, I'd really love to see him be successful, and ended up with him being trampled under the feet of loads of Bucs defenders. Nice. JB, any thoughts on the horribly overpowered Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
I was kind of interested to see where Phil was going to go for this, because when you put the list together of major contributors to the last season and look at where they are this season, it keeps being Tampa Bay, Tampa Bay, Tampa Bay, Tampa Bay. Yeah, I think the important thing is getting depth in behind those people. It is finding your next quarterback, and it'll be interesting to see where the Bucs go with that. Because obviously, when Bruce took over in Arizona, one of the first major steps they made for quarterback was to go and get Carson Palmer, kind of a veteran, experienced quarterback. Tampa Bay, he kind of struggled with Winston, but then brought in Tom Brady, a veteran, experienced quarterback. We give guys like, I think, John Gruden a bit of stick for not wanting, for wanting a very specific type of player, and he liked leaning towards those kind of older people who he doesn't necessarily need to coach up, but just needs to coach. So Bruce going into the draft and pulling out a young face that he can mentor and grow with, it would be interesting to see. The concern that I'd have if I was a Bucs fan is how many teams that kind of run it back and bring all of the same people back have that same level of success the next season. We talked about the Chiefs. The Chiefs brought pretty much everybody back this year and ended up getting to the Super Bowl and losing. We haven't seen a team go back-to-back since the Patriots, kind of in the early, was it 2003 and 2004, I think, was when they went it. It's a difficult thing to do, and bringing everybody back isn't a guarantee of success. So it's making sure you've got those positions covered for when things do happen.
I'm with you that Arians, I think, from my time obviously following the Cardinals, would always want a veteran presence. When we drafted younger quarterbacks, it didn't really work out, which, isn't necessarily a slight on Arians, to be fair. But the other thing is, Brady and Arians, it might end up being a race to who retires. In fact, with Arians being second oldest head coach in the league, is he something like that? And obviously Brady being where he is, you kind of imagine it wouldn't be impossible that they bow out together. Who knows? I mean, I don't know. It's really hard to pick a hole in that Bucs roster. The only thing I think, and you kind of said it, JB, is there's a point where old players become too old. There's a point where they lose a step or they lose that bit of speed. And I mean, God, people have been talking about Brady for the last 10 years. When's the drop-off going to occur? And it hasn't yet. But I mean, they are bringing back a lot of veteran players. I mean, who imagined Sue at this point in his career would be getting $9 million 1 year, coming off a Super Bowl winning season? I mean, he was a guy that for so long was kind of talked about as never really living up to his hype or potential in Detroit. I think they go into next season favourites. But you're right, JB, tough to do it back to back. 31 other good teams out there who'll make it very hard for them. So if that's the Steelers and the Bucs, before I break with our little pattern of focusing on our own teams, I'll hand over to you, Aldrin, and tell me all I need to know about the Indianapolis Colts.
Well, I think I've had a bit of a view of where our positions of need are, and it's tough because our free agent work so far has been very similar to the Bucs in that we've just brought guys back. So we brought back Xavier Rhodes, we brought back T.Y. Hilton this week, we've even brought back Marlon Mack. After his Achilles injury. So the majority of our free agent work has been just bringing back the guys that we had. My only area of concern is just surrounding Carson Wentz with enough offensive talent. I think we've got a phenomenal line. I think we've done a fairly decent job of bringing in Sam Tevi as a left tackle replacement for Costanzo. Whether or not he actually starts is another question. I think we're going to try and address the left tackle position in the draft, but he's a good backup. He started left tackle for the Chargers last year, and you saw what that did for Justin Herbert. So I'm not too concerned with bringing him in, but it's the receivers and the tight ends that I feel are our biggest areas that we need to improve. I think Ty coming back is good. Obviously, he knows the system. He's he's got a good rapport with Frank Reich, and hopefully he'll build a rapport with Carson Wentz. But at the end of the day, his play last year wasn't stellar, and we let him hit free agency quite comfortably. And I think there's a reason for that, is because his play didn't necessarily jump off the page until later in the season. You know, I know we call him the ghost, but he was fairly anonymous for that first, probably even up to the bye week. And then he kind of came to life in the last few games and caught a bunch of touchdown passes and was pretty integral. But yeah, his plays dipped off a little bit. I think we've got Michael Pittman, and I'm really pleased about that. I mean, the guy is a yards after the catch monster. But I think he needs to take another step this year and be the guy. But beyond that, you know, we've got Zach Pascal, we've got Paris Campbell. None of these guys are jumping off the page as kind of stellar guys that could take over a wide receiver 1 or 2 position, really. You know, neither of them can stay healthy. Neither of them can, you know, have shown that they put up big numbers. And tight end is always dubious for me. We've had Jack Doyle for a number of years and he's fairly serviceable, but, you know, it doesn't massively move the chains. And I think you've seen how vital a really good tight end can be for, you know, third down, kind of the play that you see from Kittle, Kelsey, even Gronk in, you know, at his age is, you know, stellar. And I think that's a real area of weakness for us because there's just no real depth there and the guys are just blockers. So that's my only concern, because I think the line's great, but giving Carson Wentz enough weapons is going to be crucial, I think.
Yeah, I think seeing kind of how well Wentz worked with Ertz at the Eagles, and you saw it with the Panthers when they drafted Cam, they went and got Greg Olsen from the Bears because the tight end's quarterback's best friend. Brady had some of his best successes as he got older with his link up with Rob Gronkowski, Phillip Rivers and Antonio Gates. And yeah, I think the Colts will be looking for that kind of big star player at that position that they haven't had for far too long. Like, I'm struggling to think of maybe the last sort of star tight end.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not a great list, to be fair. I think the point you make on Zach Ertz is a really good shout, though, because I do think that, you know, he's been mooted as being available and, you know, the Eagles are probably fairly actively shopping him. It would be a great boost to that tight end room if we could bring him in. And if he's available, I think he could be the one.
So it sounds like you're not, because I mean, you're mentioning tight ends and you're talking about real top end tight ends. There's only 3 or 4 of those in the whole league, you know, so to want one of those is a pretty big ask for 28 odd franchises. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is your point that you're not as well set up as you should be considering the cap space you've got? Or, because I mean, when we were talking a few weeks ago, the Colts were like the perfect balance of enough existing roster talent with this huge amount of cap space. Do you think Ballard is hoping that there'll be, you know, people jettisoned the closer we get to week 1 and there'll be some pretty significant cuts? Do you think it's just he's not been aggressive enough?
That's exactly it. I mean, I think you're right. We've got shed loads of cap space. I know it's taken a little bit of a dip when we brought in Carson Wentz, but, you know, we're still kind of north of 40 million in cap space, so we're not short on money. I do feel like there was a missed opportunity to get somebody like Hunter Henry. When the Patriots picked up Jonnu Smith, you know, I would have taken that as a sign that we could have been going out and getting Hunter Henry. Like you say, there's not a heck of a load of top tier tight ends, and Hunter Henry really ticks that box. So I feel like we really could have been a little bit more aggressive. It's difficult to judge Ballard because he's done such a good job in the draft and he's, you know, built a really good roster for us that I think is yeah, I feel like we haven't been as aggressive as we could have been, particularly when you look at the market for tight ends and wide receivers. You know, probably 2 weeks ago, say, there was a real active market there where we could have been heavily involved and brought in some more elite players. And I think what we've done is we've settled for bringing back the players that we know, which, you know, isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, I love bringing back TY for another, you know, go at the Super Bowl, but you know, there were better receivers knocking around, to my mind, of a better age that we could have been going and pursuing. So it just feels a bit tentative for me. And I think we could have given Wentz more so that we can be more successful, because we've got a great defense and a few more, one or two of those pieces on offense at wide receiver or at tight end, I think would have put us over the top, really.
Like you say, Ballard is one of those GMs who throughout his tenure, you felt like there was a plan. You feel like they've built, with a really clear idea of where they want to get to. Maybe there's something we don't know. Maybe he has got other ideas. I mean, I do think I just brought it up there as a quick throwaway point, but I do think when we get close to, teams having to get down to that final roster, I think we could see some really surprising players released. And maybe he's, of the belief that he can pick up some real quality there. But
well, I think getting closer to the draft as well is going to be the thing. I think there are going to be players who, like we talked about, the Eagles haven't. I don't think they've necessarily shopped Ertz, but have probably made it aware of the fact that, look, if an offer comes in, we'll probably listen to it. I think it's the same kind of thing we potentially expected with guys like Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson moving on, or whatever the Dolphins may or may not be doing with Tua and things like that. You get closer to the draft, even draft day, and all of a sudden, you want all your picks back plus David Putney. So the Colts haven't, I don't think, stood pat. I think the Colts have worked and improved. And in the same way we talked about the Steelers and the Bucs, the Colts are probably getting better in a division where the teams around them have got worse. So it's, missing out on, we haven't got these, we haven't got a star wide receiver or something like that, when teams around you have lost a load of their best players and not replaced them, probably balances out.
I think it is the offensive weapons that, that Wentz has got to throw to that is your biggest weakness, isn't it? I think that's right. If you look at the running backs, they did well almost running back by committee last year. You had about 2 or 3 guys that were getting touches most games. So, I think you're pretty set there. They're obviously all in on Wentz by trading for Wentz. So we'll see how that goes. But, Wentz wasn't spectacular when he didn't have anyone to throw to for the Eagles. So I think you need some weapons for him to throw to. And I'd expect you to kind of address that through the draft. I think there's a good receiver crop in the draft this year. So there's at least kind of 2 or 3 at the top as well that you think, they could go in any order of 1, 2, 3. So I'd expect you to draft, something for Wentz to throw to.
That's a fair point. You pick up one good wide receiver in the draft. Tight ends in rookie seasons, I always think are a bit of a leap, but a good draft, and we've already said how good Ballard is in the draft. I think things feel a lot more positive for the Colts. Strange, really, for a team with such a huge amount of cap room to probably go into the season as one of the favourites, really, to go really kind of deep into the playoffs, if not further. It's left for me to round out in a style that would have been clunky at best, but just wouldn't have worked. So up until about an hour before recording, I was about to talk about the Arizona Cardinals and the gaping hole that we had at cornerback and how we just simply couldn't be competitive without replacing Patrick Peterson. Obviously, the news that broke an hour ago of us signing Malcolm Butler is odd news. I think we've got him at a really good salary. I think him and Alford combined will be earning less than Peterson will be earning in the Vikings for our cornerback 1 and 2. And I could go on and talk about other holes that the Cardinals certainly have a fair few. But actually the biggest problem with the Cardinals is I think whoever is drawing up all their trade deals is playing like Madden 18, I think we're signing an awful lot of players who looked really, really good 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe not quite the players we want now. I think Hudson and Watt, I think I'd exclude from that. I think J.J. Watt had a great year last year. But I worry about the A.J. Greens and to an extent the Malcolm Butlers, that maybe we just get them a year too late. So I'm going to break with broadly the format here just to throw in something that I think is wonderfully exciting. And if I'm not talking about my team, let's talk about America's team. So I've decided to pick the puzzle pieces of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, if you go back 12 months, you obviously had new head coach, new defensive coordinator in Dallas. And let's talk about the Mike Nolan era as defensive coordinator. So in his single season, they conceded more points and more touchdowns than any other Cowboys defense in history. Going to the stats, they averaged 29.6 points a game against, compared to 20.1 points against the season before. And halfway through the season, you had Mike Nolan talking about the younger players didn't have enough eye discipline. They didn't make the right judgment calls. And you start to dig into the Cowboys, and the Cowboys not only played a mixture of 3-4 and 4-3, but just had people all over the place, young players who had no idea what they were doing. But now the most interesting puzzle piece for me is Dan Quinn, as defensive coordinator at the Dallas Cowboys, going to be the guy that could absolutely turn that franchise on its head? No. So there's kind of Phil's answer of no could well be where we end up, right? But there's two really distinct Dan Quinn narratives that I find really interesting. So before he became a head coach in Atlanta, and let's not forget a guy who, should have won a Super Bowl in Atlanta, bar, 8 minutes of utter madness. He had overseen the NFL's number one defense 2 years in a row as the defensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the counter argument and your second storyline becomes the fact that after he was dismissed as head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, Raheem Morris, as interim head coach, improved that Falcons defense markedly by about 7 points per game improvement down the stretch. So which of these Dan Quinns is the real Dan Quinn? Was he propped up by a Legion of Boom and absolute rip-roaring defensive talent in Seattle? Or was he the mastermind that no longer gets the credit for his great work because of what happened in Atlanta? Here are the interesting things for me about Dallas. Firstly, how does Dan Quinn play defense? Well, he plays 4-3, really straightforward, 3 linebackers, cornerbacks always in coverage. And what he does is he plays angry, he plays physical, he plays fast, but ultimately his play is relatively simple and straightforward. So I think the younger players there will absolutely warm to Dan Quinn, the chest-beating coach that everybody loved, even in Atlanta, by the way. He seems like the type of person who was universally loved in that locker room. Now, if you think that the team who were conceding 29.6 points a game were averaging in the last 4 games with Andy Dalton 32.3 on offense, I don't think you need a massive Dan Quinn effect to turn the Cowboys immediately into Super Bowl contenders. Now, could the Cowboys really go 0 to hero?
No. I don't know. A lot of it is going to depend on Dak, isn't it, and how he comes back from his ankle injury. Because having let Dalton go, I'm not even sure who their backup is now. Maybe they're going to draft one, or maybe they'll.
Ben DiNucci is still on the roster.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to go with Ben DiNucci as the backup somehow. But I don't know. A lot of it's going to depend on Dak. A lot of it's going to depend on Zeke as well. He was poor last year. What's he going to look like this year? Can he bounce back to the Zeke that got paid and got fed, or whatever it is his celebration is? They've got Amari Cooper, they've got CeeDee Lamb, two real good looking receivers. So they've got talent around them, but I think you're right. I think it's how the defense steps up and how Dan Quinn kind of gets them to play that's really going to make the difference. The thing that probably benefits them the most is the division they're in. They were all 4 losing record teams last year, and it was a crapshoot as to who was going to qualify for the playoffs. And then, I think they're not in a great division. The Giants have looked like they've done a good job in terms of strengthening the parts that they needed. They've made some good signings. Football team, bringing in Fitzmagic is going to be interesting and probably exciting to watch. He's a bit of a gunslinger. They've added, a couple of good parts as well, but does that make them better than they were last year? I don't know. The Eagles, I don't think are going to have a particularly good season. So, if the Cowboys come out the traps early and win a couple of games early on, then it obviously stands them in good stead to make the playoffs, next season.
My big question for the Dallas Cowboys isn't necessarily does Dan Quinn make that defense better, but the big question for the Dallas Cowboys for me is, can they keep their important players healthy? They had so many injuries on the offensive line. And I know you talk about Van Der Esch being a great piece there, but the guy misses so many games. And what was it? Neck injuries last year. It's not what you want for that position, to be getting neck injuries early parts of your career, because that, it doesn't help with your longevity. So I agree. I think Dan Quinn probably makes them a little bit better at defense, and they don't need to take a massive leap in order for that to be a significant turnaround. But if you go through the same sorts of injury troubles they've had in the last couple of years, particularly last year, you know, if you're losing linemen and you're losing your linebackers, then those guys are the heartbeat of your team, and those are the misses that ultimately lead you to lose out to a Washington football team that only needs to win 7 games. So that's my big question for them, I guess.
I mean, a bit like the Steelers conversation, almost bringing us full circle. I think anything less than it being a rip-roaring success in Dallas, and I think they'll probably be looking for a head coach in 12 months' time, let alone a defensive coordinator. I think McCarthy probably starts the season on the hot seat. But yeah, if I was not going to talk about the Cardinals, I quite like the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys have got an awful lot of story, and I think it was Phil who made the point initially, a bit like the Bucs, are helped by the division around them, aren't they? I mean, Daniel Jones might make the step. Who knows? He might be this season's Josh Allen. But other than the Giants, maybe Fitzmagic is amazing and solves all ills in Washington. But I just think the Eagles definitely aren't part of that equation for me next season with what they're looking to do and getting younger pretty much across the roster. See, I can see the Cowboys being a lot of fun.
I think the Cowboys are going to be another interesting team to watch, and we will obviously be able to watch them quite a lot because they will no doubt have a primetime game every other week, and we'll have to sit through the Giants and the Cowboys being Sunday night football at least once. Cynicism aside, the Cowboys get that because they are a very, very popular team across a lot of countries. It's, you know, they talk about being America's team, but I think there could be America's team, Scotland's team, India's team. The thing with how well Dan Quinn's going to do is how well is Jerry Jones, GM, going to be at putting the right pieces for Dan Quinn to succeed. Because you look at when you talk about the Legion of Boom, the 3 names that I think most people always think of is Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and Cam Chancellor. And none of those guys, I think, were drafted in the first at least 3 rounds of the draft. Most of them were sort of 4th and 5th. And to go back to a point that we'd made previously, you don't find gems like that in the draft every single year. There has to be a part of it being that Dan Quinn was given diamonds in the rough and managed to buff them up and get them to the point where they functioned like the unit that they became to be. Can Jerry Jones give Dan Quinn those same kinds of pieces to add into what's already there? We talked about, like, you know, injury issues for Leighton Vander Esch and things like that, but the Cowboys have got talent on that defense that can be used well. They need solid pieces. I don't want to say role players, but essentially that is kind of what they need. They need guys, to borrow the Patriots phrase, who'll just do their job while the superstars ball out and sort of do what they need to do to secure and win a game.
Do you know what? Let's hope we have a competitive Cowboys, because it's been so long. And like you say, they got such a lot of media attention, whether it's boom or bust for them, don't they? I mean, we're going to be sitting there watching them, like you say, on Sunday Night Football plenty of times in the coming season. So I don't know. I mean, there's also, I mean, we haven't got into it, but the Gus Bradley versus Dan Quinn argument and who really was the architect of those great Seattle defenses. I mean, you could go on and on and on. But, you know, when you're looking at that zero to hero equation, I think the Cowboys are by far the most exciting. I can't really see too many others. So, do you know what, guys? What an absolutely wonderfully polished attempt at trying to fix the biggest problems for the greatest NFL franchises that was. I think you can all roundly congratulate yourselves on some wonderful input. Sadly, what we learned really in recording is that the Pittsburgh Steelers are 12 months from a reboot. The Arizona Cardinals have signed only old players, but at least they've signed somebody, unlike the Colts. And we'll all be here in 12 months, even more bitter that Phil is celebrating a Super Bowl victory with the Bucs. It just has that horrible inevitability about it, doesn't it? But thanks for your company. I think next week we'll probably start to split our topics to include a bit more of the draft. I think we're already starting to nudge there with some of our conversations. But remember, if any of you out there in the great listenership that we have through the World Wide Web have your own views, then drop us an email or hit us up on Twitter, as all the kids are saying. Thanks for your company, gents. We just made a podcast.
Thanks a lot.
Just gonna do it.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe
And be cool. Tell your friends.